we have two more ways to go through quadratics, and completing the square is one of them. You guys will like completing the square because it's very procedural. You guys like procedure. You like to replicate and just do it over and over again. You don't like to have to think. I try to get you guys to think, and that's why a lot of you guys struggled last week. There were some struggle points, and we'll go back through those things because there's a lot of really, really silly things that were going on that we will discuss as we get into them. Now, completing the square is one of the methods we're going to talk about today. We have another one to look at also, which we'll get to, which shouldn't be as very difficult either. When we complete the square, there's a couple of little steps that we're going to look at. What we're trying to create here is we're trying to create junk squared. Now, when you have junk squared, that means I'm trying to do something to get it to look like this. When you had a problem like that, what would you do to solve for x? You'd square root both sides. When you square root both sides, what do you have to put on the other side? Plus minus, okay? So if you square rooted both sides, this was a method to solve a quadratic because it was junk squared. This was a very easy way to do that. Square root of 17, can I simplify that at all? No. The 4 then moves over and it becomes... And that was one method to solve an equation. Now, what we're trying to do is to take this equation to turn it into junk squared. We do that via a couple of steps, all right? And like I said, this is a great method when your b value is even, okay? You can still do it if it's an odd number, and I'll show you how that works, but it's really, really, really nice when it's even. So what we do here is this. There are bless you. Step 1, move C. What I mean by that is I'm going to move C to the other side. How do I move that -3? Add 3, okay? Now, when I rewrite this, I want you to rewrite it like this. X squared plus 10x plus blank equals 3 plus blank. Do equations change if you add the same thing to both sides? Yes or no? Right, they don't. So what I'm doing here is I'm forcing myself to do something in a minute by putting the plus blanks in. All right? Now, second step, after I do that, take half of b. What's my b value here? 10. What's half of 10? 5. Is it positive or negative? Positive. So what I do is I'm going to write that in parentheses. I take half of 10, it's 5, I drop it to here, and I write x plus 5. Okay? Now, I square it. Move this up a bit here, sorry. Third, square that. I'm going to square it, and I'm going to add it to both sides. You probably talked about it in Algebra 1. It wasn't a huge thing. I'll get out of the way, just like I always do. Yeah, it's something they don't do a ton of, okay? So you square it and you're adding it to both sides. Every time, no matter what I square something, whether it's positive or negative, when you square it, it's always positive, isn't it? That's why I say we're adding it to both sides. That will never change. That's why I put plus blanks. Because if it was a -5, what's -5 squared? 25. You're still adding the same thing, aren't you? Okay. So now, what you're doing here is you're creating junk squared. Because what times what's 25 you add together to get 10? 5 and 5. X plus 5, x plus 5. Junk squared is junk times junk. That's what this comes from. So now, what's 25 and 3? 28. Step 4, solve. Okay. How do I undo squaring? Square root. So I take square root of both sides here. I get x plus 5 equals plus or minus square root of 28. Is there a perfect square that's hiding in 28? Yes, sir. 4. So square root of 28 becomes what? 2 root 7. Yeah. So remember, it's 2 root 7. So I get, let me move this up a bit again. Well, I get x plus 5 is plus or minus 2 root 7. And then lastly, how do I move the 5? Subtract it over. And I get x equals negative 5 plus or minus 2 root 7. We basically took an unfactorable quadratic, factored it. Okay? We took an unfactorable, hello. Oh well. And you wind up with that. Now, this works all the time. It just so happens it's the cleanest when b is even. Yes, sir? You divide it by 8. I'll get to that here in a minute. Yep, that's the other rule. That's the other rule we'll talk about here in a second. That's good. Yeah. Okay. We do this completing the square stuff. Like I said, it's a means by which we can factor, and you can factor anything with it. It just so happens it's the easiest one to factor when b is even. Okay. So let's take a look at another one. Oops. I just did that one. Did that one? X squared minus 16x plus 76. So x squared minus 16x plus 76. Question. Yes, sir. Well, let everybody get caught up to it. I know you got it. I know you got it.
Also, it's the one I just did.
Yeah. But that's right, it was the one that was just on there, wasn't it?
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was it 78 or 76? 78? It's pretty close. So, what's the first thing we do? Move C. So how do I move to 76? Subtract it. So we get x squared minus 16x plus blank, turn it off please, is negative 76 plus blank. Okay? Remember, plus blanks. Always put those plus blanks in there so you remember to put it to both sides. After we do that, what's half of negative 16?
8.
Negative 8. So, negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8. This always drops into here. That value, whether it's positive or negative, drops into there. Now I've squared the negative 8. When you square negative 8, what do you get?
64.
And that goes up here on both sides. Again, I want you to think of this. What times what is positive 64 that adds together to get negative 16? It has to be negative 8 and negative 8. We're creating jump square. Okay? So what's negative 76 plus 64?
Negative 12.
How about negative 12?
Yeah.
We started with a positive 76 and we subtracted it over. Okay? So now, what do you do? You're right, though. Take the square root of that. Now, one of the things that I was seeing a ton of, which I shouldn't have been seeing a ton of, is how you're writing your values when you simplify square roots. You guys are putting your I values all in the wrong spot. It always has to go by the root stuff, okay? This is going to be x minus 8 equals plus or minus. We all know the square root of 12 is 2 root 3, right? In this case, it's 2I root 3. It goes with the values before the radical. It does not go out in front of the plus minus. That means you're adding something or subtracting something from I. That doesn't work. I never once did anything like that, but many of you were doing that. Stop doing that. Also, stop using decimals. They are going to slaughter you in the long run. Don't do decimals on any of these things. Simplified radical form means fractions. Okay? And also, on the topic of fractions, no more slashy fractions. You know what I mean by a slashy fraction? No slashy fractions. You guys forget how to do stuff with slashies. Trust me on this one. You need to write them normally. So lastly, what do I do with this negative 8? So I'm done. X equals 8 plus or minus 2I root 3. Yes, ma'am. Or not rational. Squaring, or what are you doing? Oh, so yeah, you're simplifying. Simplifying. Yeah, rationalizing when you're moving it out of the denominator. Yes.
How do you know which one's negative?
It doesn't matter. Anytime there's a negative one, just it's I. I comes out. Yep. And then you treat it as 12. Okay? The I, that negative 1 comes out. Because remember, when you deal with this, that's the same thing as saying that. Yeah. Okay? Think of it that way. You just take the negative 1 out and treat that, and then right away, so that's your I. Okay? Reason why we do this is because, don't write this down. Reason why we do this is because eventually we will talk about what are called conics. Conic sections deal with ellipses, hyperbolas, other types of parabolas and stuff in circles. And what happens is we wind up writing equations and graphing them. Well, standard form of conic will look something like this, that you would have to basically complete the square twice. It's not something that's overtly difficult, it's just getting used to how it works. This problem itself, to graph and do all that, might take 5 minutes. But it's not an overly complicated scenario. It's manipulating an equation to make something work, okay? So it's a process by which we utilize completing the square. We use it a ton with this stuff. We might get to it this semester. It'll probably be second semester, unfortunately, this year, just because we're on a little bit of a time crunch on some stuff right now. So take a second and do this one. Via complete the square, please. X squared plus 4x plus 1 is 0. Okay? Try that one out. What's the first step?
Move the z over.
All right, so you get x squared plus 4x plus blank is -1 plus blank. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Are you doing plus blanks?
Yes.
Please remember to do plus blanks. Trust me, okay? What's half of 4?
2.
Drops into here. When I square it, what do you get?
4.
4. Here, in here. What's -1 plus 4? 3. Now what?
2 over.
Isn't this a nice little method? It is a nice method to do these things. All right, it's a really nice and easy way of doing it. This works every time. It's super nice when B is even. Sometimes B is not even and it can get a little muddy, but again, it's not anything that's difficult. For example. Yes, sir.
When you said the arrangement you have, like in the final answer, so the I always stays with the square.
Yes. Yep, it has to.
Yeah.
Otherwise you think about it, if it's I out here plus or minus 2 root 3, that means like it's negative, the square root of negative 1 plus or minus 2 root 3. See what I'm saying? It doesn't work that way. This has to be part of that.
I think I put it in plus or minus I.
That's okay. I mean, it's mathicant to put the number in front of the I. Just like you would write 2x, you wouldn't write x2. All right? All right, same idea here. In this case here, if I'm going to do this via complete the square, once again, I'm going to add 1 to the other side. Okay? If I add 1 to the other side, I get x squared plus 3x plus blank is 1 plus blank. Okay? Now, notice how I've been writing down half of b. I've been writing this 3 over 2 or 4 over 2 or anything. I've just been writing it as that fraction. I would leave it like that because now this is half of 3. That drops into here. If I square that, when you square a fraction, you're squaring both the numerator and the denominator. What's 3 squared? What's 2 squared? 4. So I'm adding 9/4 to both sides. Okay? Now you're on the other side there. What's 1 plus 9/4? Well, isn't 1 the same thing as 4/4? What's 9 plus 4? 13/4. And this is the problem where most of you guys started to mess up on the quiz, where you had a fraction you had to take the square root of. If you wrote it as slashy, you forgot the denominator. Here you have to square root the whole thing, which means you have to take both the square root of the numerator and the denominator. What's the square root of 4? 2. Can you simplify the square root of 13? No. So your final result here would be x plus 3/2 equals plus or minus root 13 over 2. Okay? What do I do with the 3/2 on the left-hand side then? Subtract it over. So then you get x equals negative 3 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2. Sometimes textbooks or solution guides might write that as one fraction, negative 3 plus or minus root 13 all over 2. You can leave it as 2 independent fractions, and that's fine. Not always will they be the same denominator. Sometimes they're different. But a lot of times, if you do wind up with the same denominator, it will, in fact, write it as one solid fraction, and this is fine. This method is perfectly fine by me. Yes, sir?
So if the plus or minus just applied to the top of it, it's also apply.
Yes, because when you have a fraction, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Because it can be both positive, both negative, one negative, one positive, or vice versa. It doesn't. Yes, sir?
How'd you get to 13 over 4?
What's 9/4 plus 4/4? And a lot of times with these fraction ones, you're going to get ones that work real easy with the denominators. I mean, 3 over 2, something over 2, your denominator is going to be 4. So you're adding and just dealing with stuff like that.
Yeah. And so do I have to simplify it? I can't just say it's
Correct. You always simplify everything. You always simplify everything. Every time, every time, every time. Okay? Yes, sir? Square it. Just like we did before. And when you square a fraction, you square your top down. Okay? Now, what happens when your value up front isn't 1? If your a value is something greater than 1, or it's negative, all you do is you divide everything in the whole scenario by whatever a is.
Always, is there going to be like curly?
There could be. More often than not.
Like that.
More often than not, it depends. More often than not, if we look at this one, I'm not going to do all these, there's no reason. More often than not, when you're in the textbook stuff, they tend to make it 2 out of the 3 are usually pretty clean. The third one might be a weird value, but when you're moving fractions around, it's not going to be anything that's going to be, like 11/17ths, and you got to add 44 to that. You don't want to try and figure all that out. More often than not, they're halves, fourths, make something that's manageable. Okay. So all you have to do here, guys, is you just get rid of your a value. You divide everything by whatever a is. In this case, my a value is 3. So I would just divide each piece by 3 and rewrite. X squared minus 2x plus 4 is is 0. And then from there, I would complete the square. Okay? What's that? Yep, basically I'm making that coefficient 1. When you complete the square, your coefficient has to be 1 in order for it to work. So whatever your a value is, you just divide it out. Sometimes it's clean like this, sometimes it might be a fraction. But again, as you just saw, fractions aren't that bad. All right. What's your first step here? Subtract the 4, okay? So when you subtract the 4, you have x squared minus 2x plus blank is negative 4 plus blank. Okay? What's half of negative 2? It's negative 1. So x minus 1. When I square negative 1, what do I get? 1. Negative 4 plus 1 is? Negative 3. Square root, we get x equals 1 plus or minus I root 3. If you see that and you can make that jump without writing it all out, all for it. I'm wrong with it. Some of these are pretty easy where you might be able to make that step. If not, you know you've got to take the square root of negative 3, gives you I root 3. You know that's plus minus. And then you just add the 1 over and you put it out in front. Okay? Which leads us one last method of doing things. Quadratic formula.
He was like, why would you use that formula? That's why I might have 4AC. I remember from years ago, yeah, it's the easiest.
Yeah, and you, I mean, I wouldn't totally yell at you because you're using previous knowledge, but that's okay. I was looking for, that's why I wrote on there, solved via factoring or solved by, the ones on there at the end of the second page were solved by any method. If you were able to manipulate it enough, you could have done it if you knew how to do it. I wouldn't have yelled at you, but I never would say you can't use a method that you used in the past, but one of the things that I know with quadratic formula is that you guys have all seen it, you guys have all done it. The only kicker of quadratic formula is that you have to label what your parts are, okay? If you know what your A, B's, and C's are, then everything works out rather cleanly-ish, if you will. You still have some simplifying problems and stuff to work with. You still have some multiplying and all that to go through as well. But it's not that it's going to be anything crazy. Yes, sir?
The only difference is how we can do it if the determinant is less than 0.
Right, that's the only, and that, we'll talk about the determinant stuff tomorrow. But one of the things that I wanted to remind you of is that you guys all learned a song, didn't you?
No.
Have you learned this song, though?
Oh, God. I don't know.
What if you do something
That's not everybody going to try to feel a song with somebody who dies. So, with that, I bring to you the annual, if you feel like you want to make a quadratic video formula song of your own via groups or whatnot, no more than 4 people in a group. Your submissions via YouTube must be linked to YouTube must be emailed to me by beginning of school next Friday. This is the one extra credit project I do per semester. This is one of them. I haven't decided point value or anything like that yet. That all comes up later. But the idea is it must be original. You cannot copy something else that is out there because I kind of. Well, you're using the. You do have to use the quadratic formula. That's okay. You can repeat that one. Whether you are performing it, whether you make an animation, whether whatever, you can work with the other people in the other class. I had someone ask if they can have somebody help sing for them. That's fine. I've had a lot of laughs at this. We will watch them. Hopefully, we'll be able to watch some of them next Friday. If you get them to me early enough and go from there. Yes, ma'am. Yes. I would prefer that you were performing it, you were in the performance. Yes, sir. No, I just Googled. I found that like 4 times. Actually, I found it about 10 years ago, I think. I just think it's awful. I just think I can do his brain. That. So, I guess you can die doing math. You can use, yeah, that's fine. What I'm saying is, if you go on YouTube and look for quadratic formula song, there are other ones that have been great. Alright, anyway. So, when you're doing quadratic formula, obviously it is relatively simple. One thing you want to pay close attention to is when your b value is negative, because when you square that, Lord knows somebody would accidentally forget that -4 squared is 16, not -16. You'll screw something up like that. That's why I always say, when you're doing these things via quadratic formula, take a second and list out what your A, B, and C's are, and then write out the formula. Quadratic formula isn't anything that I give you guys. Shh, gentlemen, I don't give you guys formulas except for certain cases. There are certain things I will give you formulas for on quizzes and tests. Quadratic formula is not one of them. It is something that I'd say 90% of you probably knew anyway. When it gets down to the formula stuff, you get like formula sheets. I'll have conics, things like that. There'll be certain things I'll give you. I won't make you memorize certain stuff. But for this example here, you'd have to manipulate it, set it equal to 0. So you have 2x squared, 1x minus a 5. That's why I always say list your A, B's, and C's. So 2, 1, and a -5. And if you haven't used quadratic formula anytime recently, just write it out. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's the one you guys probably all knew. Not the over 2a, over 2a, over 2a.
Yeah, then the quadratic formula would look like it had 3 ways.
I know. So -1 plus or minus square root 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times -5 all over 2 times 2. What was b? Okay. So in this case here, notice how I wrote everything out before I do any math. Always do that. Makes your life easier. What's 1 squared? 1. Yeah, turn off your electronics. I know it's me. My phone's telling me that my watch is telling me I can't square -1. Anyway, so 1 squared was what? 1.
You forgot to put the minus on it.
Oh, I might. Sometimes it doesn't register. -4 times 2. -8 times -5. So, final answer. You get -1 plus or minus the square root of 41 all over 4. Can you, gentlemen, can you simplify the square root of 41? No. Once again, from time to time, you will get radicals that you can't simplify. And once again, you will get fractions that can simplify. For example, let's say you had -6 plus or minus, we'll just say the square root of -12 all over 3. What's the square root of 12? Well, that won't work. Let's say it was 2. I'm sorry, I'm going to make this. So let's say you had this to go with. You would simplify that being -6 plus or minus 2I root 3 all over 4. In this case here, your lead terms are all what? They're all divisible by 2. So this is a case where you can simplify parts out of it. You know that you get -3 plus or minus I, oops, forgot my I root 3 all over 2. That's what you can do here. If only 2 of them are simplifiable, you cannot because there's plus minus. You got to be very careful about some of these things. A lot of you guys are going to try and do something like this, where you have 3 plus or minus. I guarantee at least one of you guys is going to do this. You cannot do that because of the addition. Okay? You can't do that. Just like some of you guys were trying to distribute it into foiling before you could do that. All right. So I posted. Well, I didn't post it yet. On the calendar, I'll have for you guys the 2 sections will be on there. I believe on the 5-6. So there's 5-5 and 5-6. This one's page 295. And then at 5-5. Bless you.
Is it really that big?
Hey, Michael. We have social studies besides 525.
Do those. One thing to remind you guys of is that sometimes solution manuals will split up your fractions. Like here, they might have written it as -3 over 2 plus or minus I root 3 over 2. You don't have to do that. I know that, I don't think they turned Slater back on for the Chromebooks, but I know all of you know how to do that on your phone, so watch out for Slater stuff. They still might screw something up. It does happen. Go from there. Tomorrow we will do the discriminant stuff and then talk about what to do, which method you choose, and why and when. Okay, that's kind of an important thing to be able to figure out. Wednesday we'll do some of the modeling stuff. There's basically other ways to write out quadratics and knowing specific parts and bits. And then on Thursday we'll probably start doing some review stuff, because what I'm shooting for is testing out of the quadratic stuff come next Tuesday, so you guys are aware on that one. So if anything, I'll have some review problems, the algebra stuff for you guys come Thursday. Then we can do some more of the word problems and review stuff like that Monday. Test all of it on Tuesday. Okay. That's my plan.
What's the second half of the week? Like,
Next week?
Yeah.
It'll be probably, we'll start chapter 6.
Alright, so I'm missing Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
We're going to miss you terribly, but not terribly miss you. You'll see the videos.
I'm going to be out tomorrow.
I'll have everything posted. I don't know what number we're doing right yet, because I didn't call it off yet. So, we'll get it. All right.